Hi guys, how are you doing? We're back with the second video of how to create a landscape using the principles of one-point perspective with a little bit of color theory and a little bit of theory on how to create the illusion of depth through mark making. So far we've got the sky and we've got some of the ground. And what I'm going to do next is start doing a little bit of the mark making for the shadows of the trees in the snow. Okay, so I've still got in my palette the colors that I used for the sky, and they are pretty similar, but they've got a little bit more purple onto them. So I'm just gonna add on a bit of crimson to make it a little bit more purplish, and I'm gonna stick on a bit of white in there. Gonna mix with a bit of green, but it'll be fine. Okay, and I'm also going to get a bit of white into both of my mixes because I'm running a little bit low and I just want to create a little bit more paint. And I'm not going to clean my brush because I want a tiny bit of that crimson in here. So the colors are slightly lighter than the ones that are in the sky. Okay, so if I look at this mark making, it's pretty much obeying the same kind of principle. So the brushwork is really gestural and expressive. I'm just gonna make those 2 marks, and then I'm gonna start making a few marks here and there. Now what I want you to observe is how the mark making is quite small at the top and how it gets really big by the time it gets to the foreground. And the reason for that, I'm not following it exactly the same, but it's more or less. The reason for that is that, again, we're trying to create an illusion of depth and realism. Okay. Although Hockney is not super realistic, he's a little bit more of an expressive painter. So now that I've got these kind of marks that are reminiscing of shadows through the snow, I'm gonna get a little bit of the purple in, and I'm working really wet. I'm wanting the colors that I'm using to be mixing on the surface, and I'm just making it quite rough at the moment, and then once I'm finished I can go in and put in some detail and make it look a bit prettier. But at this stage I prefer if it's quite rough and loose. Alright, I'm gonna get another brush, kind of like smaller brush, and gonna get a bit of white in, and I'm just gonna paint a little bit in between these ones to get a little bit of mixing on the surface, and also because my background was really flat. So I'm also painting horizontally now because I'm trying to achieve that perspective sensation. Okay. Alright, so I'm kind of done with that. And then I've got these marks at the back. Kind of got like the purplish color, and then I've got an orange color that is mixing with it. So I'm gonna get a little bit of my deep yellow cadmium hue. Oh, I've actually got it here. And I need a smaller brush. Okay, so I've got weird mark here, weird mark here, And it's nice to see a little bit of warmth coming into a painting, because so far the palette has been super cold. So then I think he's kind of mixing this one. It's kind of quite dirty, the color that is at the back over there. So my guess is that he's using a little bit of purple from the snow. And then there's a little bit of the purple with that one to make it a bit grayer, and then there's the pinkier one. So I'm just adding a little bit of red to those ones. You want the colors to be really, really, really dull at the back, and more than anything, you want to respect that perspective. So everything is still kind of going like this. So why do you want it really dull? This field over here on that plane is really at a distance. So if I put a warm color, it would immediately bring it forward. So what I need to do is to keep all of my colors really grayed out. If you're struggling to get the lines kind of like, if you're getting that instead of that, it's because you need to water down the paint more. And when you water the paint more, it's easier to make finer lines and have better flow. And I'm going to be mixing a little bit of that ochreish, kind of like more yellowish color over there. It's not perfect. Hockney didn't make it perfect either. All the detail is going to come on top. Okay, so I'm still pretty much not really worried about things looking pristine. So here the perspective of the line is changing and it's literally going up. So I'm just gonna do that, and I'm gonna get this there. And while I'm at it, I'm going to quickly cover up that blue that I had on my initial drawing, because I don't want that to be showing up. And I'm gonna do the same over here. Alright, so I've got all that base over there, I've done all of these bits over here, and now I can continue with that detail at a distance over there. I'm just getting a bit of this green that I've already got, and I'm mixing it with this one to create that very, very dull color. And then the next thing that I need to do is ensure that I'm getting rid of completely that blue. Go away, blue! Alright, I'm gonna leave that as such. Okay, so now I've just got a little bit of a crying baby on the background. I've got a little bit of a permanent green that I'm gonna use to put a bit of that detail on the background. So I don't want to cover my dull green completely, and I'm gonna leave it at the top, so that's also helping me with the illusion of depth. So I'm just gonna leave that there quite bright, nice and bright. All right. So the next step is going to be painting the trees. And the trees, we're going to be doing them in several layers. So I'm going to be using a bit of crimson. Kind of need another palette. So to make the color that I've got on over there, I'm going to use crimson. I'm going to use some deep yellow. Whoops. And I'm gonna mix in there a little bit of blue. So I'm kind of like arriving to a dark brown, reddish kind of brown. And I'm just gonna add a little bit more Prussian or Pisalo blue to make it a wee bit darker. So even though your trees will look green in the Hockney picture, I mean, you might be using a different picture for reference. But you also always need to think about you're putting in a much darker color than you see on top. The reason being is that we're painting on layers. And if you don't use a darker color on the bottom layer, you're going to lose depth, you're going to lose the appearance of an object being three-dimensional. And if you need to put the dark on the top layer, it will make it appear flat. So it's really important that whatever you see on the picture that you're doing, may it be that you're copying from a photograph or you're copying from a master, you always make it very, very dark on your first layer when working in acrylic. If you're not working in acrylic, it doesn't matter. So when I look at these trees, again, trying to represent the idea of perspective and illusion, the trees that are closer to the horizon line are very, very small. And as the trees get closer to the foreground, that means closer to me, they are very, very, very big. Okay? And just by making that distinction of this tree being so massive that it should be about up to about here, and that one is that radical difference, is what's really making it appear three-dimensional. Okay, so I'm gonna get a little bit of a guidance. With this brownie color, I'm just gonna put a little bit of that there at the bottom. To guide me where the trees are going to begin from. And I'm going to plan this out and see where do my trees need to come up to. So again, even if I see them green, I'm doing them with this darker color. So I'm going to start my trunk there, and I'm going to make it go up to here and make a couple of branches. And then I'm going to my second tree. I'm not being too detailed, I'm just putting in a little bit of a base, as all my details is going to be with the green afterwards. And then I'm going to go on to my main tree. I'm going to establish a width of it. So normally the way that I teach, I use a great system to copy, because that way we can get real excellent proportion and scale and composition, and a lot of the drawing problems resolved, we get them resolved by using a grid. So in other videos that I will be filming, I will be showing you how to use your own grids and how to create them, and you can use them to make any kind of copy of a photograph, of your own drawings, or of works from the old masters as well. Oh, I started talking and I got a bit distracted. Okay, so I'm just going on base layer, base layer, base layer. So I've got the biggest part of the tree, and there I went a bit wrong, but I'll be alright. I've got that one there. So as much as using grids is great, I think also to do a little bit of freehand painting is also pretty good, just to be a bit more creative and be a bit more free when you're working. So I more or less got my big bits of the trees, yeah. And then I'm gonna go on to the other side. And at the moment things are looking really ugly. And they're looking really ugly because I'm still pretty much in base layers. What I find a lot when I teach is that people get really, really discouraged at the beginning because everyone wants their work to look pretty. And they kind of waiting always for those top layers to be coming on so that they can work on detail, make things look pretty. But it's really important that we understand as artists that to get to those detail areas, you really need to do a lot of groundwork. And if you don't get your groundwork done, then you're not going to be achieving good results, or as good results as you could be. Yeah. So I'm still keeping things loose and a bit ugly. Okay, this tree over here. And now I'm gonna grab brown brush. Well, I think this is about number 3 or number 4. And I'm gonna do a little bit of detail on the branches. But all of this detail that I'm working on now is for nothing else than to give me a little bit of a base layer and a little bit of depth, because afterwards I'm going to be putting on loads and loads of greens, and I want these browns over here to give me depth for those greens that are gonna go on top. I'm gonna do a little bit more. I'm gonna cross them over. So there we have a good base for the trees. I've got my bigger trees in the foreground, and I've got my smaller trees fading into the background. Now, just before I finish, I'm going to be using the same color to do some of the detail on that hedge. And I'm using directional mark making as Hockney did. Some of them are going up, some of them are going sideways. It's really, really important that you always keep an eye on what you're doing, and that you don't kind of get into doing things automatically without looking. So I'm just doing a little bit of base layer, putting in the work for the detail that will come on afterwards. Okay. And while I'm here, I've still got a bit of that green from before. I'm going to add a little bit of white onto it. And I'm going to make it a little bit warmer by adding some deep cadmium yellow. People normally call it orange, but it's not orange, it's yellow. So that would be the warm yellow in your palette, and that would be the cool one, yeah? So out of this one that I've just done, I'm going to add a tiny bit of white, and I'm gonna make a lighter one and a darker one. So I'm working on 2 different values or tones. Whatever you do, don't call them shades. Okie dokie. So I'm gonna start working on a little bit of that detail, just because I am not gonna wait for paint to dry. So for me to do all of the green detail on the trees, I wouldn't need this paint to be dry. But I'm not going to be sitting pretty waiting for that to happen. I'll just deal with another area of the painting that I can work on while that dries off. So I'm keeping the brushwork pretty loose. I mean, these are very loose painting. And the mark making is getting bigger as I'm getting to the front. Tidying up a little bit of that mess. This area is always quite tricky. I've done this painting before with loads of students and it's a tricky area to deal with. I'm gonna be adding on a little bit here. Oh, it's a bit wet in there, in the other corner. So on this area there's a little bit of blending, and I'm just going to change the way that I'm doing my brush work. I'm going to wet my brush quite low, and I'm gonna start making some grass-like detail. I'm gonna have to be working on several layers to do this. It looks very simple, but to make it look better, it's gonna be done in a few layers later on. Okay. And so we're gonna leave this here, and we're going to continue next week. I'm also going to be posting some videos on drawing exclusively for you guys to be working out some mark making techniques on charcoal. And later on we're also going to be dealing with animals and portraits. So I'm really looking forward to passing on a little bit of what I've learned so far, and see you soon. Bye bye.